Welcome to the Be Empowered podcast with your host, Graham Hopkins. My goal is to help you regain your power by bridging the gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are. In simple language, that is like making your childhood dreams come true. This is for those who want to make an impact in their lives but don't know how to get there. Be ensured, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world.
So welcome everybody to this edition of the Be Empowered show. My name's Graham Hopkins. Today we have the return of John Mark Stroud. We started very interesting discussion during the last interview. Welcome back to the Be Empowered show, and we'll continue our interesting discussion where we left off, which was we were basically talking about how mankind chose to separate himself even from the abundance that we were experiencing in order to experience, so that when we come back to it and we waken up to that abundance, that we enjoy it and have fun with it even more. Is that the way you see it?
I see it a lot in that way, that the desire birthed for the experience or dream of separation was one that was done in joy. No doubt the separation in the dream has birthed incredibly realistic and authentic experiences of suffering and loss and extraordinary pain. Tragedy beyond imagination. But nonetheless, just as when you dream a dream at night, no matter how horrific it may be, you awaken the next morning and go, whew, I'm glad that was a dream, and you don't give it another thought. So, imagine, you're a pilot or anyone in a profession or anyone that's exploring some aspect of themselves. We like to explore what are the limits or bounds of that, It's like parachutists then want to base jump, or now they do that fascinating thing where they have flying suits, so they're like flying, and then you got that guy with actually now has a wing and jets on his back. So our very nature is a ceaseless exploration of what's possible. So if in our divinity we knew all things are possible, well, you can understand and appreciate the excitement of at least thinking, well, maybe that's not true, and then reawakening to that. So it's as much as it's a joyful journey of self-exploration, self-discovery, it's also a deep way of the one knowing itself, because no one's actually being harmed, nothing's actually, just as in a dream, you wake up and none of that's actually happened. It's happened in your consciousness. And the consciousness in which it happens is ceaselessly and eternally invulnerable. So it's kind of like, well, why not explore all potentials of being? Can't harm anything, can't lose anything. So for me, that's a very joyful, incredibly joyful experience of being, and even being in this world, which seems to be one rooted so deeply in separation. It's been said you can be in this world but not of it, and that's true. And it's actually very effortless. It's a very peaceful and joyful way to be, rather than being in and of the world, so to speak. So to me, it's the excitement, it's the truth of our completely free nature as consciousness itself. Because consciousness never judges itself, it just explores itself.
So what's your definition of consciousness then?
Oh my gosh, isn't that a fascinating way to limit the infinite? This is a thing that we try and do so desperately. This is rooted in our separation. Well, let's see how we can define it, and then everyone has the self-prerogative to, do I agree with that definition or not? If I were to attempt the impossible to define it, I would simply say consciousness is an outpicturing, the actual manifest experience of an infinite mind. So for instance, within your mind is infinite. Consciousness is what you have filled it with, what you're aware of. So consciousness might be the ideas, mind is the infinite potential. So consciousness requires conscious. You're aware of it. Mind could be just pure awareness, pure potential.
Okay, so that's why awareness is such an important attribute to have, because it's making you more aware of the possibilities.
Well, it's making you aware of yourself as awareness. When you recognize your awareness, not the things contained within it, then you no longer fear things that seem to have beginnings and endings die, because you've always been aware and you'll always be aware. Effectively, you've always existed and you will always exist. So awareness, we oftentimes misperceive that by what we're aware of. But for me, awareness is the pure, infinite ability to be aware. And of course, none of us are, we're all given that. None of us are having to effort to keep our awareness. It's just given. I mean, we all are perfectly aware that we exist, and we don't have to do anything in order to, I mean, that's a kind of gift or a bestowal of the Creator, so to speak. So I define awareness and consciousness a little bit differently. Consciousness being the content of pure awareness. Now, when you become aware of yourself, your own very nature, as awareness itself, it's kind of hard to experience fear as you did before.
So what do you say to people who are experiencing separation and are in fear, and they would love to move out of it, but they don't seem to be able to grasp how to do it?
I would say hold the desire. I mean, cultivate the desire. What is the truth? Open your being rather than becoming more rigid. Become softer, more curious, rather than holding the rigidity. I mean, we believe in the world, oftentimes, that peace comes as a result of having the right beliefs. And the crazy thing about beliefs is we give beliefs a real power. Now, Graham, I know you've done extraordinary work on your own pathway, but I suspect that you had beliefs 20 years ago which you don't have now, and you actually laugh at them.
Totally.
So
Totally.
what makes the beliefs you're holding now any less laughable?
They're probably just as laughable.
Yeah, so when we recognize it's not about beliefs, and it's kind of interesting, if you actually look at the word belief, it begins with B, and then it adds lie to it. So we take our being, we add a lie, and then we have a belief. And that lie limits the infinite nature of our being, and then, as you know, we set about to defend our belief. And that propagates the separation. So beliefs, there's everyone arguing about their lies rather than celebrating our one union of being. So, you know, when people are caught up in separation, I begin with the recognition and know that they are whole, and they are whole now, and they're using their wholeness to create that experience of separation. So there's not a power outside of them doing it to them, and if they're willing, they can become increasingly aware and therefore awaken to their own empowerment and release the attachments to beliefs. And by the way, concepts begins with the con. You know, it begins with some level of con or self-deception. I mean, you know, the world knew it was flat. The belief was, so, you know, people were frightened to get in boats. Now we laugh at that now. And there's going to come the same time that we laugh at the fact that we actually think we're bodies, that we actually think that the body is what defines us and gives us our expression of being. So I just trust implicitly their divinity within them, because they're actually using that to create their separation. And that inner divinity, the same kind of inner voice that began to speak to me, knows perfectly and effortlessly how to restore their awareness of their true self. So in joining in that way, and me no longer claiming a separate universe, oftentimes my consciousness can kind of be illuminated in ways to help, suggest, join, whatever. So I meet them exactly where they are, because you know what? That's their reality. It doesn't do any good to say, oh, you're experiencing illusion. Well, that's just kind of stupid. It's their reality where they're at. So meet them there and invite them to begin to question it and explore it in a new way. And when the mind opens to exploring its own nature rather than being contracted in fear, it just becomes a kind of natural, expansive progression.
So, I think you call it body mind. Just to make one small quote, you say the body mind illusion is a deception of the mind. So what do you mean by that? And why do you make it that order, body mind, and not mind body?
Well, the body mind, oftentimes people call it the ego. Now, in the past we called it Satan, we've called it the devil. Ego is the new politically correct way to say that which believes it is apart from God. But the body mind, and we, of course, as we've done with Satan and we've done with the devil, now the ego, we vilify it and we make it bad or wrong. If you imagine a computer has an operating system on it, we'll call that mind, and you install a program called ego, the operating system is simply running that program perfectly. I mean, the operating system doesn't express a judgment about, hey, this is a wrong program, I shouldn't be running it. It just runs it. So the body mind, to me, it just defines that aspect, that little program that's running in an omniscient mind or on a computer, so to speak, that believes it is individual, distinct, and separate apart from. So it's only the mind holding the idea that it is a body, rather than recognizing it is infinite mind or consciousness itself, in which it's having an experience of itself as a body. So it's kind of a top-down view rather than a bottom-up view. So, and body-mind, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not bad. It's just a limited creation. There's another way that I use as an analogy. If you imagine a beautiful glass vase, you can put things in the vase. They don't change the nature of the vase. And you're free to, you got flowers in the vase. You don't want flowers, you take the flowers out and you put Coke in the vase. You pour the Coke out, you put rocks in the vase. The vase never changes. That's like the operating system. That's like consciousness or mind. But we've mistakenly become identified with specific ideas that are inside it. The things that come and go rather than the eternal base, if that makes sense.
The thing that I find amazing is that it seems like desire is what brought about the separation, but it's also desire that is leading us back to feeling connected.
Of course. Isn't that fascinating? And we don't ever lose desire. I mean, if you just look at it on the human scale, even with all its seeming problems, our way of life now is the desire for more mobility, better health. The beautiful country you live in is an expression of desire. I mean, everything is an expression of desire. When we free desire to be what it is, and of course include the desire for unity, and we really begin to surrender into that desire, you kind of know there's something contained within the desire that must fulfill it. Now, the interesting thing about this is, how could anyone desire God, divinity, wholeness, peace? How could you desire it if you hadn't already known it? If you hadn't already known it, it wouldn't even exist for you. So the fact that the desire is there tells you the experience is also there. Because if you'd never experienced it, you couldn't know. So we're all humanity as a collective is returning to a prior state of consciousness, a more expanded state, a whole state, heaven on earth, whatever you might want to call it, because we have known it.
That's a really important point, actually.
Yeah, and when you recognize that, you'll stop to devalue desire, and you'll begin to let desire actually move in your being. And you'll trust it more because it's taking you back. It's not taking you into the unknown, which is what our little body-mind thinks. It's actually restoring you to your known. It's awakening you to your eternal self. So when we restore our pure relationship to desire, we begin to trust. Not as an effort or a motivating, but as a very natural kind of sense of, duh!
So tell us about, you say all seriousness is an attribute of ego.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's only the ego that can express fear. It's only the body-mind which thinks it's the body which thinks it's going to die or that it can be sick or ill. So it's only the body that seeks to defend anything. And all seriousness is a defense of something. You know? And this is why, of course, we all look at infants and small children who haven't been taught to be frightened yet, and we marvel at their innocence, and we long to experience their joy and their freedom. So there you have it.
So what do you mean when you say it's only our misperceptions that stand in the way?
Well, a perception is a value assessment. You know, I think it was Christian Murdy one time that said, you know, the child sees a bird flying in the sky, and then someone teaches the child that's a bird. Well, they never see the bird again. They only see the label of it again. They don't experience in its curiosity, its wonder, in its unknown. So we've lost our ability to be in wonder because we ceaselessly seek to define and make specific. Because I think we can only experience relationship with others through shared definitions, rather than we share one mystery between us. And if we don't seek to share definitions and share beliefs or agree on the same lies, I mean, that's really what all religious conflict is about, is everyone's fighting to say their definition of truth is true. Well, what if we didn't need to fight about the definitions anymore and we just agreed that there's some great mystery that maybe we can't even define and we're all equally a part of it? Then kind of this universal language begins to move. You know, it's been called love, it's been called many things, acceptance, compassion, and that begins to express in a new way, and it begins to move us in new ways. So perceptions are definitions, like the world is flat. More information says, oh, that's not true. And once we have a bigger realization, we let go of the old perception. You know, we throw it away like a used pair of shoes. We're not frightened about it. We don't experience any loss. So when we allow our experience, our little universe, to begin to be corrected, and our perceptions, you know, for instance, we have all kinds of perceptions, one sex to the other. Well, there's no real truth about that. But because we hold the perceptions, we then manifest an experience of our perceptions as though that's true. So when we begin to question everything we believe, and realize that we can't find any reality in it except within the belief itself, all of a sudden we start to realize, well, they're not so true. And then we don't seek to defend them or define ourselves by them anymore. And when we're no longer limiting ourselves by limited definitions, something greater starts to inform us. You know, mystery. I mean, we can call it God, but we can call it all it is, but I don't have a clue. I just know that it's love. I just know. I don't know how you know.
John Mark, do you think that maybe our perceptions are something that are generated from our separation, and that if we weren't separated, if we all saw ourselves as one, then there wouldn't be perceptions, maybe?
Oh yeah, there wouldn't be any need for them. I mean, the ability to perceive and separation go together, because of course you need a separate perceiver in order to perceive. If we all shared one greater perception that there is no separation, of course we'd stop hurting each other. We'd stop killing each other. We'd stop harming each other. So perception and the separation are one and the same, because they're rooted in an individual perceiver.
So, John Mark, how do we put this into practical terms for people who maybe want to move out of their fear-bound reality and feel what it's like to be connected, to be one?
That's a fascinating question, Graham. I'm curious to see what comes here. How do we make it practical?
Yeah.
For me, the practice of it, the practicalness of it, is living from that felt sense. Now, even when I didn't feel whole or didn't feel one with everyone, I had to allow into my consciousness, what would it be like? Because it's kind of a chicken and the egg. I'll give you a very simple symbol. If you imagine yourself standing in front of a mirror, and you say, I'm going to feel whole and happy when the mirror smiles first. Well, you know, Graham, you're going to stand there for a very, very long time waiting for the mirror to smile. But at some point, it might arise in your consciousness, I wonder if I'm actually the source of happiness and joy and the feeling of wholeness. And then you begin to practice and play with smiling, and bam, what do you know? The mirror starts to reflect it back to you. So all of a sudden you recognize you're one with cause, you're not at effect. So your joy and happiness has nothing to do with what seems to be happening outside of you. It's actually an inner experience of a very simple and practical choice. And you begin to live in that choice and awaken ever greater to that power. So how people get to that stage, fortunately, there's an infinite number of pathways. Everyone, just as everyone has created their unique expression of separation, will create their unique pathway back to wholeness. So there isn't a one way. Every way works. It's like every river spills into the ocean. And you know what? There's something that naturally, gravity, there's some greater force that naturally takes the ocean or the rivers to the ocean without the river having to effort at it, you know? And the ocean just says, hey, welcome back. And then all the rivers lose their separate names. So the mirror analogy, the river analogy, all of those things are trying to get us to be willing to step into an essence of ourselves that we might not believe to be true, but we're willing to get curious about.
But it all begins with desire.
It all begins with desire. And it's going to end with desire. And that desire will then birth a new desire. If we don't allow desire to move, or we poo-poo it, you're limiting the very source of creative expression, the very source of our being.
I've got this idea, John Mark, that I want to ask you how you see this. I have this idea that what we classify as ego is actually a distortion of a greater ego, which you've already um, talked about as being super consciousness, the mind of God, the Christ mind, and our choice to move and disconnect from that higher mind has created our diminished ego. How do you see that?
Well, ego for me, the acronym is edging God out. So that, of course, to me, reflect the lower mind, or the body mind, or the individual personality, so to speak. I wouldn't say, in my definition or my vernacular, the higher would be a greater ego, because there's no longer an edging God out at that level. It's just the one mind of being that knows it's already whole. The
reason I came to think like this is I have a friend who's Greek. He actually lives here in Dubai, and he pointed it out to me that ego actually means I am. So if we are fully embodied in our full consciousness and we feel fully connected, then we are, because I am.
Okay, then using that vernacular, you and I are saying the same thing, and hallelujah, we can sing, dance, and celebrate that. Different words, big deal.
Different words.
The one thing that we can all universally share, the one thing that is universally true and that's completely trustable, is perfect silence. There's no lies in perfect silence. There's just pure being. So, that's why there's so much, in spirituality about silence or stillness or perfect peace. So we set our definitions, your definition of ego equals I am and whatever. We put that aside. We can agree in the silence that there's being happening, that there's existence. Whether we define that as I am or ego, there's no need to argue definitions, big deal.
Maybe silence is another practical tool that people could take upon themselves in order to feel more connected, because there is great power in silence, as you say.
Extraordinary, infinite power is in silence, because of course silence represents the, like, if you want to use it this way, the quantum field of infinite potential. And when I no longer kind of draw, the whole quantum thing from waves to particles, when I no longer try to collapse infinite possibilities into specific experiences based on my limited past, and I'm open to the infinite field of possibility, the waves expressing themselves in greater possibilities, then it kind of gets pretty exciting. You want to move into the silence. You want to move in with curiosity and wonder to the unknown, and then see what arises within your being. So that's what births within me greater desires than anything I ever might have imagined as a body. You know what I mean? It's like if you carry into the silence the belief that you're a body, you've already said, okay, infinite possibility, you can only reveal yourself to me in this little tiny way. But when we move into silence with absolute oneness with the silence, oneness with that infinite possibility, with just this really childlike, curious openness, I mean, the stuff that can arise in your awareness will literally blow your little mind. So silence for me is a very practical way of being, because I'm moved by silence, which to our thinking minds, we think that means we'll do nothing. Quite the contrary, in my experience, you get into the flow of the infinite abundance of creation, and you begin to be moved from it, not towards it. We're drawn towards it, and then we rest back into it, and it begins to move through us. So silence can be practical if it's allowed rather than tried to force. If we're trying to force silence in our minds or force ourselves to not think, we're kind of missing the point. If you imagine an orchestra, the sound of the orchestra can only be heard because silence is present. It requires a pre-existing silence for sound to be present. So to try and get to silence by disallowing sound or disallowing thought can be missing the point. You're just trying to create, I mean, that's the mind thinking that's the way to go, but it's just bifurcating and separating even more. So silence is a real soft, gentle, allowing curiosity. That's been my experience of it. Rather than trying to get your mind to where there are absolutely no thoughts, it's much more easy to arrive there naturally than through effort.
Like myself, who has quite a big thirst for knowledge.
Mm.
How would you suggest that somebody who is emphasizing knowledge learns to come into that silence and relax in the essence of who they really are?
Well, sure. So, the thirst for knowledge, I shared that too, and I kind of pursued it through science, was my kind of curiosity. But at some point I realized everything that I was thirsting to know, I was always struck with there's infinitely more to know and I'll never know it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
When I began to realize that rushing towards knowledge, and of course knowledge, as you and our discussion here, is knowing the specific. Knowing science, knowing trigonometry, knowing aviation, knowing thermodynamics, whatever. It's kind of an exercise in knowing the specific, which is knowing what's outside of you. So at some point I realized the excitement of that thirst always was accompanied with an unfulfillment of there's always more to know. And as you know, the thirst for knowledge can be very exciting, but can also be very exhausting. And very frustrating, and requires a lot of time and energy and effort. So when I'm just in my own inner awareness, I began to say, well, there must be a better way. And what arose in my consciousness was, what if I begin with, I'm already one with the source of all knowledge. What began to arise in my awareness was there was a peace that began to grow in my being at the knowledge that I was one with the awareness, or one with all the source of all knowledge. And then it became not about the specific knowledge itself. The craving to consume knowledge started to fall away into a real kind of freaky rest. I really kind of didn't understand it when it began to arise in my being, because it was kind of cutting against all of my habits of seeking more knowledge. But I began to rest into something that didn't require any knowledge, that just was. And ironically, the more and more I did that, the more peaceful and attractive that came, the less energy there was to desire knowledge to be brought to me. And what I found over time was that this brilliant wisdom began to pour forth, and it's an extension of that source of knowledge. So it's kind of like, if you're seeking knowledge, you're really beginning with, I don't know. And I began to begin with, I know. And the more I began to know that, the more I began to experience that what I needed to know, which was I am, back to your great one massive ego, or what, God, whatever you want to call it, the less specific knowledge mattered.
That there's two types of knowledge then. There's knowledge that comes from the perspective of disconnect, and there's a knowledge that comes from a perspective of connection.
Yeah, and the perspective of connection is peace. The kind of energy moving knowledge of the Pacific is usually a loss of peace and a belief that more knowledge will get peace, or more knowledge will create wholeness. So it's when we begin our journey, we're deeply rooted in the fact that we're separate. But all of our actions birthed out of separate, no matter how productive they may seem, are actually validating the belief in separation. At some point we heal enough or we awaken enough to get back to begin to question that fundamental thing that's birthing all our desire from separation. And we question that fundamental thing. And what we begin to discover is that I and the source are one. So we begin to be moved and live in a different way. Because seeking must rest on a denial of wholeness. And when we stop denying our wholeness and we start to affirm it, wholeness begins to show up in our experience. It's kind of back to the mirror thing.
Mm.
So, glory to all those who stop seeking because they're getting to finding. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So
but we become identified as a seeker, as a pursuer of knowledge, and that's how we define ourselves.
Seeking, in effect, seeking produces fear.
Well, of course, seeking is the byproduct of a choice for fear and can only replicate itself. A choice birthed in fear can only really bring more fear.
Hmm.
I mean, you know, it's like if you got one ingredient to create with, everything's going to be tainted with that ingredient.
So here's a question for you. I have friends who are bound up in kind of religious belief, and they fear offending God.
Yeah.
So they really want to move out of it, but they still have this belief system in place, and you've already talked about how strong our beliefs are.
Oh, yeah.
What can they do to start moving beyond that?
To the extent that they're willing to question it. I mean, I might just suggest to them, if someone was in front of me fearing God's judgment, I would just say, hey, just for kicks, you know, why not? You can do that. Just imagine for a moment that you're God and that one of your children has done something that might be stupid. Are you going to punish that child? I mean, would you really do that? So oftentimes, if we're willing to just for a moment in our imagination be the source of all that is, would we be the terrible God that many religions profess is God? I mean, just some like common sense goes, no! I wouldn't harm my child because, I mean, it's like an infant learning to walk. Well, because they fall down, are you going to punish them because they're not perfect?
Mm.
No, I mean, it's just sometimes, I mean, some of these crazy beliefs we have about God are just, they're dumb. I mean, they're just, it's like, how can we hold such insane beliefs? But because we believe them, they frighten us, then we hold on to the beliefs, you know. So I often just ask some very simple and basic inquiry questions, and if they're vested in holding their religious beliefs, if they believe that, well then great, go ahead. They're not hurt, you know. When that belief no longer serves them, they'll stop.
Mm.
You know, when it no longer served humanity to believe the earth was flat, well, we gave up that belief, and nobody's been traumatized by that in thousands of years, you know. So, if they believe that there's a God out there that judges, that can be deeply frightening.
Mm.
But usually just some kind of basic common sense starts to unravel that.
Yeah. Well, John Mark, it's been an amazing conversation with you, and
To hang out with you. Thank you.
it's certainly got me thinking, and I really enjoy your teaching, I must say. Can you just tell people where they can contact you and connect with you?
Well, of course. Fortunately, we're all connected. They want to use the worldly means.
Yeah.
My website is onewhowakes.org, and that's onewhowakes.org, and they can contact me there. And they want to hang out with me like you and I have, I love doing this. I mean, I love sharing what moves through me and joining others wherever they're at.
Well, I think it's an amazing experience. So I'd like to thank everybody joining us on the Be Empowered show. I really trust that this has enabled you to be empowered just that little bit more as we all learn to recognize that we are connected. So thank you for your input, John Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Graham. I honor, respect, and celebrate you and all your listeners.
Thank you very much. If anybody's got any questions that they'd like to direct to John Mark, you have his website. I also have a website, www.beempoweredgroup.com, and on there I have a free ebook, and that's called Know Your True Value and Worth. And John Mark, I guess you'd understand that that's really what we've been talking about for the whole discussion that we've been having.
Yeah, and everybody already has it, and they will find it. I'm absolutely certain of that.
Absolutely. So thanks, everyone, and on behalf of John Mark and myself, we wish you every blessing, every joy, and we just together trust that you would find that inner peace that John Mark's talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Be Empowered podcast. For more on regaining your power by bridging that gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are, go to www.beempoweredgroup.com and enter your name and email address to receive a free ebook and get notified of any upcoming podcasts. Remember, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world. Changing your energy transforms your life.